Hi, welcome to Pay It Forward. Welcome back to my workroom. Today I've got a beautiful little pennant for you all to make. It's a new pattern that I've designed and it will be one in a series. You can make it up as bunting or you can make it up as a single wall hanging like I have here. It's nice to make something for little boys for a change. If you'd like to make it along with me, simply click on the link in the description below. You can download, of course, your free pattern templates and then I'll show you how it's done. Let's get sewing. Here are the things we're going to need to make up our little pirate puppy pennant today. So first of all, you need your front and back pieces. I'm using a lightweight chambray cotton here, and I have interfaced that with a woven fusible interfacing, just so that it's got some nice strength and stability to it. Also makes it easier for when we're sewing our little applique pieces on. And then next you will need your little 2 crossover bone pieces. And I've cut those just in just a cotton print. I usually make the head of this one in felt. That also has your heat and bond on the back. All of these pieces have your heat and bond on the back. And then you're going to need your little headscarf piece, just in a cotton, and your little headscarf tails. You're going to need your little ear pieces, which I've cut again in felt. Your little eye patch, which will just sit there. Little nose. Now both of those I've cut in felt. I've made the nose a different colour to the eye patch just because it makes it stand out more. And you will need your second little eye patch. Now there's a couple of options here. So long as it's a tight, busy little print like I have on this one here, I've got a couple of options here. I'm going to probably go with the stripes because I think that looks a bit more piratey. Is piratey a word? Well, it is today. So we'll go for the stripes with that one, and then you need your little pink eye surround there. That one goes in there. And you'll also need a little, I'm going to use a button today for the eye. I've been lucky enough to get these tiny, lovely little black buttons with a little white circle around, which is awesome. And that one will just sit there. You could use one safety eye there, because once this little pennant is put together and we have our little length of dowel in there, it will sit out from the wall a little way anyway, and that shank behind a safety eye wouldn't affect it hanging up at all. So you can use a safety eye, which is a quick and easy option. You'll also need some embroidery thread or pearl thread. I'm using pearl thread today. I'm using the 8 ply and the 5 ply. Just because we're going to be sewing in our couple of little pieces there. There's a little bit of hand sewing with this, but today I'm going to be showing you that I'm doing most of this on the machine. You'll be able to see here, this is a blanket applique that I've done all the work with this one. Show you today on the machine. I'll probably just blanket applique a couple of the little pieces and you'll be able to see that effect. Doing it on the machine, of course, does make it just that little bit quicker. And of course you will need your dowel if you're going to be making it as a pennant that will hang on its own independently. If you're going to be making this up as a series of bunting, which you certainly could, you still will sew a hemline in and then your rope will thread through. If you are thinking of making this up as bunting, my idea would be to make a couple up in the puppy and then a couple of them just with your crossbones with an appropriate fabric. I think perhaps a black and white stripe with your bones on there, and that would interspace with the puppies and make for some really great bunting for a little boy's room. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to iron on our little bone pieces, and you can see how they're situated there. Just take off your backing paper. Now remember that we're going to be sewing a seam around the entire outside, so we need to leave enough room for that to happen, but we want our little bone pieces to sit just nicely lined up. Line them up with the center there. How I will do it is I will press one on first and then I'll show you how I stitch them on. So now you can see there that what I've done is I've first pressed on this little bone piece and I've stitched around on the machine just around right close to the outside edge. We're going to be leaving a raw edge. I'm using a contrasting thread here because, as I have with this one, I've really been able to outline those little bone pieces, and I've done that with the blanket applique, but you can still get a similar effect by using a contrasting thread on your machine. So I've sewn around that one, then I've pressed my second bone on and I've stitched around that one. Just remember, when you are using a contrasting thread, something that's really going to show up and you want it to show up, just take your time going around all those little curves, because a contrasting thread is going to be very, very visible, which of course that's what we want. But just be very aware of keeping all of your stitching nice and smooth and even. And so the next step there then is to add our little face piece. So removed our heat and bond backing paper, and you'll see that that little one will sit in just beautifully just there. You only need a tiny space. Probably it's probably about ½ centimetre there, so that we keep everything down here, because we're going to be sewing a little hem and we don't want that extending. So we're going to press that one into place. There you can see that I have my little face piece pressed on, and I've just done the same thing and I've stitched around very close to the outside edge on the machine. Now this time I've used a contrasting thread, but not quite as bold, and so that little face section stands out really well. If your fabric behind is a little darker, which in this case it's a little darker, so that little head piece is going to stand out well enough anyway. With this fabric I used here, it was much lighter, so I really wanted to, you know, outline that edge, but this colour has come up quite nice. Again, make sure that your stitching is really lovely and even when we're really going to be seeing that thread. So the next step is our little ears, and I do this in this process because it causes the least amount of interference when you're sewing it on the machine, so that's why I have it in this order. So those two little ear pieces, they sit further to the outside edge of the ears, and they will just be popped on. Just check your top head piece that you're not interfering with that. Check your positioning there. You may need to just shift your ears up a little. We'll press those on, and I'm going to sew those on in exactly the same way, only this time I'm going to be using just a deeper pink thread to really outline those ear sections. So there I have my little inside ear pieces sewn into place, and that little contrasting darker pink has brought that out beautifully. Our next step is to add our little head scarf, and you'll see that that one will fit just perfectly across the top of the head. Make sure that you line up your two side pieces here and along with the top of the head. That one will be pressed on into place, and then we've got our two little tails, little ties. Now remember to keep those away from the edge. Don't be tilting them out too far because they'll get caught up in your seam. So we're going to just pull that one down, and then the little one just below it there. Now we do exactly the same thing. We're going to press those into place and just machine stitch around those pieces. We now have our headscarf all stitched into place. Our next step is to add our little side eye patch like we have here. Now this is why we do it in this order, so that we can see exactly where to place that little patch. And you can see that it just sits below the little headscarf there, and it's only probably about 6 millimeters from the edge of the little face there. And it's very important that the positioning with this one is right, because this is a little English Bull Terrier and they do have a very distinctive little face, and their eyes really do have to be in the right position. So that one will be pressed on, and then the little pink eye surround, you'll see that it's got a curved edge, it's got a very curved edge, and it's got a straighter edge. The straighter edge is towards the center of the face, and you can press that one on, you can see just over, and it will just sit just above. I hope you can see that there. That little piece just extends a little to the side, just as it does there. And I will press those on, but I will press them on one at a time, and I will do exactly as I've been doing and just stitch around each little shape, and then they'll be settled in place. Now next piece to go on is our little nose piece, and that's going to be pressed on there. That one actually sits just 1.25 centimetres from the lowest edge of the chin, right in the centre. Make sure it's nicely centred, and I will stitch around that one in just a slightly darker thread. Now you'll see there that I've stitched on that little nose. You'll also notice that I have been changing my thread colour all the way through this little project, and it might seem a little time consuming, but it's definitely worth it to have all the right colours. It really does make this little pennant pop. And I only change my top thread on my machine. I just use a neutral thread in my bobbin thread so that I'm not having to pull that out every time, and it's really gives you just such a lovely effect. You have to remember this is a pennant that's going to be hanging up in a wall, so it's a visual product that people are going to be looking at. So making the most of that is really good. So our next step here, now that that little nose is stitched on, is just to mark in a little mouth here. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. You could use just use a fine pearl thread and an embroidery stitch that little mouth line in, which I have done on this one because this one was all done by hand. Or what I'm going to do is to continue with my machine and actually stitch that in with some black thread on my machine. But the way I've marked that in, you can see that on the bottom of his little chin here, he has a little indent that comes in and marks his chin each side. So all you need to do is find the centre of your nose, pop a little mark there. We're going to be sewing over that in black anyway, so you won't see that little line. And I use the bottom of a large cotton reel. And you'll find that that little curve, just match it up with that little indentation there on that side and that side. And you get the perfect little slightly smiley mouth, but he's a little bit stern because he's a pirate after all. So I'm just going to stitch that one in, and I'm going to stitch those little lines 2 times just so that it's really quite heavy and obvious. There you can see the little mouth line stitched in, and that's nice and clear, shows up really well. So the next step is, you can see that I've pressed on my little eye patch now in position. That one's only about 4 to 5 millimetres from the edge there. You can see it just sits up a little over the little head scarf, and it's just tilted up slightly. It's just on a slight angle across there. Now this is the only piece that I like to hand sew on because I want to give it that look of a real little leather patch. So I'm going to be sewing a blanket applique stitch. Now you can, as I have here, make up this entire project using this stitch, which I have on this one. But this is the only part that I really do think needs to be outlined really beautifully with this little stitch. Now I do have this stitch on a separate video, shows you how to do this stitch. Now I'm using in this case I'm using a Gutermann extra strong top stitching thread, my favourite thread. I often use it for applique because it doesn't fray away and it's very, very strong. You can use a couple of strands of embroidery thread or pearl thread, anything like that will work. So I've got a knot in the end. I'll show you a couple of stitches here, but you can certainly check out my video that shows you how to do this blanket applique stitch right up close and personal. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to make our stitches quite small, so really only about 2.5 millimetres, and they are 2.5 millimetres deep and 2.5 millimetres spaced apart. So I'm coming out through the loop, and there's our first stitch. So I'm going to move along only about 2 millimetres, and I'm going into the fabric, and I'm coming out right on that little edge of the little shape there. Coming out through the loop again, and that's what gives us that little binding edge stitch as we go. It will connect it all up along there. And I'm using this colour on the black because again it's really going to show up, and it just gives it that little leather sort of a look. And we're going to add a couple of little crosses just at the top as we finish, just to make it all look just a little bit more authentic. So another little stitch there You see, just coming out on the edge. Make sure you're rotating your work as you go so that your stitches continue to go straight out from where you work, otherwise they can tend to lean. And you can see there that that's giving us that lovely little bound edge. So I'm going to work all the way around back to here. Now that my little applique stitch is all done, you can see just before I've cast off, I've just stitched in a couple of little crosses on the top there, just for a little bit of extra effect. And my next step is I've just used my fine pen and my ruler, and I have ruled a line from the edge of that little eye patch just to the very edge of that little headscarf, and you can see exactly where that sits. You just need around about 8 millimeters from the top of that patch, and then just a tiny little couple of stitches will go across here just to show that little strap for that little eye patch. And I'm going to do that one again on the machine. You could do it by hand with your embroidery thread in black, but I'm just going to continue on with my machine work. There you can see all of our applique work is done, and I have sewn in my little strap for my eye patch, and I've just added that little button there that you can see that it just sits just at the top of that little pink section there. And now all we need to do is put together our little pennant. So it's simply just take your back and it's just right sides together, and we're going to match up those seams right the way around. You can use pins if you like, or your little clips. I'm going to clip all the way around, and then we're going to take it to the machine, and we're just going to stitch from the top down to that little point and all the way up, and we're going to leave this top edge open. And the little seam allowance is only really tiny, only about 4 millimeters. There I have my stitching. My little pennant is all sewn up. I've just clipped those little corners off there so that when we turn it through, as we're going to now, we're just going to be able to push out those little points. Just a matter of turning that one through. Push out all of your seams. I like to get a knitting needle in there to get all those points out. And then we're going to give it a press. Really roll those seams out. Then I'm going to give that one a little press, and then I'm going to take it back to the machine, and you can see there I've sewn a little top stitch right the way around. It's probably about 3 millimeters in, just to give that a nice professional finish. There is my little pennant all pressed out. You can see I've done that top stitching around that edge, and it gives it just such a lovely finish. Now your next step is to turn your top hem under, suitable for whatever you're going to be using to hang that little pennant. Now I'm just using a little fine piece of dowel. You might be using these as bunting, and you may be threading just a small rope through there, or you may have a much finer little stick than I have here. So just measure your little hem. You can see too that I've just sewn a little zigzag stitch along that edge just to keep that all nice and neat and flat, and I've just measured that little hemline so that it will just accommodate my little stick, and then I'm just going to sew that straight the way across there, ready to pop that one in. So there you see, I've just sewn in my little hem and just popped my little doweling rod through there. Now the next step is how you can string these. There's so many ways you can do this. You can use any kind of ribbon or twine, anything you like to tie from either edge. I'm actually going to just use some blue twine. That's what I have. I would have liked actually something like a twisted red and white twine would have looked lovely too. And the way that I'm going to do this, I'm just going to, I've just got myself a little split ring here. I'm going to pass my folded edge of that twine through, and then I'm going to take both of my ends through and anchor that down, and that gives me a nice little knot. And I'm going to be taking one string this side and one that side. But before I do that, we can add all sorts of little extra embellishments if you like. Now if you have a look at my other videos, you'll see that I've just recently put up a little tutorial to make these little felt tassels, and they look absolutely wonderful with this sort of project. So I've got my little red and grey one here. So what I will do is I'm going to slip this one on here first, and that will just sit nicely there. And then as I wind my little twine around, that little end all bound up there will keep that little tassel in place. So I'll decide on how long I want my little strings to be, and then I'll just use a little bit of just some clear craft glue to glue the end of that stick, wind my twine around it and let that dry, and then that little tassel will never slip off. There's all sorts of things you can hang. Of course you could hang a couple of little tassels there, or you could add perhaps something like a little oldie skeleton key, something like that. So many things you could do with them. So I'm just going to pop my twine on. All finished. My string is nicely wound around. You can see there, just wound around nicely. A little bit of craft glue holds it in place, and my little tassel hanging there, and my little split ring, and the same on the other side, and that will hang absolutely beautifully. You can see how lovely that would look in a little boy's room. Perhaps make it up for the little pirate in your life. Also, the fabric that I've used here for the backing, so many different prints that you could use. It would look really wonderful with a lovely bold stripy print, something very pirate-like. But I hope you've enjoyed making this little one, and you can see they're very quick and easy. And make sure you check out my tutorial for making the little felt tassels. I'm sure you'll use them in many, many ways. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed making up this little pennant. Remember that there are some more coming up. I'm going to be doing a woodland animal series, which you can make up as bunting, or you can keep them in singles like this one. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be beaut. In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe, because you don't want to miss any of the next upcoming projects. And of course, always, everybody, when something good comes your way, remember to pay it forward. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.